Welcome to Season 3 of Behind the Headlines. This is the podcast where we go beyond the bylines and into the lives of the women shaping our world through journalism. In a media landscape that still too often sidelines women's voices, we are here to center them, to listen deeply, to ask better questions, and to explore the stories behind the stories. From conflict zones to newsrooms, from investigative desk to grassroots reporting. This season continues our mission, amplifying the women challenging narratives, holding power to account, and redefining what journalism looks like. This is Behind the Headlines. Let's begin. Hello and welcome. Our first guest for Behind the Headlines third series is Culton Scovia. She's a TV journalist, press freedom advocate, and a founder of Her Story Uganda. From her first reports as a school student to covering major political stories across Uganda, Culton will talk about her journey, the challenges she has faced, and her vision for empowering women in media. Welcome, Culton. It is so lovely to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Laria, and everybody who has made it. Thank you for sparing your time to join this podcast.
Thank you so much. And I will start with the first question, just to get to know you a little bit more and get to know the Culton behind the headlines, behind the byline. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your passion, what music you listen, hobbies you have, like who is Culton in the real life?
Okay, my name is Culton Scovia Nakamya. I'm a journalist and a media practitioner. I'm also a feminist, and I believe in freedom for all, and I believe in non-negotiable freedoms. So I've done journalism for the last 12 years. I have just completed my master's in gender, media, and culture from the London School of Economics and Political Science. When I'm not doing journalism, I love listening to music. Music is therapy to me. I'm not a Swiftie, but I love Taylor Swift. If I'm not listening to Taylor Swift, you'll find me dancing to Burna Boy's music. If I'm not dancing to Burna Boy's music, I'm back home listening to Kenneth Mugabe and an artist called Azawi. Basically, that's my music. I enjoy it. Of course, I love reading, not fiction. I love reading stories based on reality. And also that's the kind of movies I watch. So yeah, briefly, that's me.
I'm pretty sure we will discover more and more about you, even after with the question and the networking. But this gives us a little bit of an understanding of Culton on a daily life. And my second question is because I would like to know where the passion for journalism came from. So when did you start thinking you wanted to become a journalist?
From the age of 11, I wanted to be a journalist. 11, I was in primary 6 in Uganda, and that's not a level you determine your career path, I'm afraid, for most of the people I've interacted with. But luckily or unluckily, at the age of 11, the injustices around me and the way I saw the community, I really wanted to be a journalist, to tell. The idea was journalists tell stories. Journalists are voices for the voiceless, and that's a statement we've grown hearing. But besides that, there was one event that made it very clear that I fell in love with the career. So in primary 6, I was given responsibility by my school head teacher to represent the school by reading the school report on behalf of every child, every student at the school. So when I read the report, I was also asked to write a poem about universal primary education. So the poem was more outstanding than the report that the vice president by then at the event, who was officiating at the event, handed me a gift. And of course, as a vice president, they always move with journalists, media people. So my story was televised, they broadcast it on TV, on national TV, and everybody was proud of me. But in as much as I didn't watch myself, being watched by other people and them appreciating the kind of art I came up with was enough trigger for me to say, I want to do this when I grow up. Shockingly, I was shy about it. I didn't have confidence. So about 1 month after internally taking a decision that I want to be a journalist, a teacher in school asked us, each of us, to name their career, their professional ambitions. And people were saying, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a pilot, I want to be, all sorts of jargons that, in my perspective then, as an 11-year-old, I didn't have context to. So I shied away from telling the class and the teacher that I want to be a journalist. I thought people that do journalism have a specific elite background. And because I came from a humble background, I thought I will never make it. So there is no purpose of me telling the class I'm going to be a journalist, because it will never come to reality. You know what I told the teacher? I told the teacher that I want to be a tomato vendor. And the teacher was so disappointed. She didn't answer anything. She just walked away and went to another student. But the reason I wanted to be a tomato vendor was, one, that in my community, that is the kind of job I saw women do. And that was the kind of job I could relate with. Women cannot be, I had never seen a female doctor. So I thought there was a limit to what women can do. That's what I thought as an 11-year-old. Because the class mocked me, because the class laughed at me, I carried the ambition forward to be a journalist, because I was motivated by what happened on TV, by how much reaction my mother received. And I also wanted, as time grew, as I grew older, I started refining my career path. I started attaching reasons and purpose, what journalism does to communities. And that is why I stuck to journalism.
And thank you so much for deciding to keep pursuing that career despite all the internal conflict and your classmate laughing at you for your fear of maybe stepping into a role that was not really available for you to follow at the time. So I'm so proud and happy that you actually persevered on that journey.
Thank you.
Do you have any, or have you had in your career any journalist role model or someone who you really admire their work?
Yes, I loved, basically, my journalism in the initial stages was attached to my, inspiration was basically issue-based. I didn't have role models initially, but as in my early years of journalism, I admired Sophie Ikenye. She used to work with the BBC. I loved how Sophie presented her issues. Sophie Kenya is the reason I picked interest in broadcast journalism. I started as a radio journalist and then went into print media. But because of Sophie Kenya, I said, I really want to go on TV. This is so good. Sophie would present an idea and you're like, wow, the way she presents it, the way she breaks down complex issues for people to understand them, the way she would ask her questions, framing them, and the respect she gave to her guests, not using her power as a journalist against her guests, was such a big inspiration. And then, basically, Sophie Kenye was the face that inspired me so much to keep advancing as a journalist.
Is there a valuable piece of advice you learned that changed the way you show up as a journalist today?
The piece of advice I got might not be very specific. I've received so many advices, but I'll mention two. So the first was told by one of my friends that as long as you stick to what you want, there is nothing you cannot achieve. The second advice I read in a book called Lean In by Cheryl. And Lenin said, we'll achieve equality when men do what women do and women do what men do. That will be the meaning of equality. That means if women are staying at home, if men can stay at home and women take care of the chores that men do or whatever they do, if women are able to go to work and fend for their families and men are entirely at home looking after babies, probably that would define the equality. But also Cheryl said in the same book, Lean In, that as a woman, you have to consistently push for what you shouldn't allow to be your power to be abused. Constantly push for a share of what belongs to you, whether at work, whether in social spaces, besides other issues that were happening around me in my workspace. The Lenin book was an addition to the kind of motivation I got to go for gender studies. Yes, because it's really, really so eye-opening.
Absolutely. If I am not sure if everyone else in the audience has read it. If you haven't, I think it's a good one to add to your reading list, for sure. But I'm wondering, is there an advice as well that you received from one of your at work, from one of your manager, from one of your boss that actually changed the way you do your work today and you show up today as a journalist?
Yeah, my advice is there's an advice that my former employer gave me, and that advice was in relation to the kind of stories I was doing. So he told me I was risking so much of my life to do the kind of stories I was doing. And he said, you risk a lot for stories. This TV will not stop when you die, but your family will be permanently impacted when you die. The company does its best, and we always tell you, it's you in the field, so know when to withdraw. Sometimes something can happen and you don't have a single second to call office for an advice, but it's you in the field. You feel like it's risky for you, withdraw. That story can wait. Better stories are told by journalists that are alive, not journalists that have died. So in as much as you want to tell the story, there are better ways of talking about a situation without necessarily risking your life to the extreme. So maybe I was a bit reckless. Maybe I wasn't, but it really changed the way I approached risky situations, because, anything can really happen anytime. So how you analyze the situations, how you approach it is important. That advice really changed the way I approached journalism going forward.
Absolutely, a very important advice and reminder, especially as journalists reporting on very risky context and situation, to not become the story themselves and just find a way to keep practicing the profession in the safest way possible. This actually leads me very well into the next question, because we want to talk more about the story you reported on and the work you're doing in Uganda. But before we go into your personal experience from this side, I wanted to just set a little bit the context for our listeners and for the audience with us, because maybe not all of us we are aware of what's happening and what has happened in Uganda so far. We know that Uganda is going through a highly tense post-election period. President Yoweri Museveni was declared the winner of the 15 January election with 71.6% of the vote, despite a widespread allegation of vote rigging from opposition MPs. This is also the highest percentage he recorded, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is the third mandate for Yoweri Museveni at this time. And since the election, yes, is
the fifth.
Fifth,
the fifth mandate, yeah.
Yeah. Since the elections, an unknown number of people have been killed, and the Chief of Defense Forces, who is also the president's son, has also claimed the killing of 22 opposition supporters, framing them as a terrorist. The national flag now is defined as a symbol of dissent, and because it was used by the opposition leader Bobi Wine, and has been treated as an anti-government symbol, and so many activists have been detained, NGO workers have been suspended, and the media is tightly restricted and there is no internet access, and especially use of social media, which remains till now, even after the election are over, compromised. All of this has created a climate of fear and uncertainty for many Ugandans. And so if you were to explain to someone who doesn't know your country well, how would you describe the current situation for women and for the freedom of the press, and how those two realities intersect?
Thank you, Laria, for providing context. President Yoweri Museveni came to power in 1986 after fighting for 5 years. He fought a guerrilla war or a bush war for 5 years and won it with support of so many people that thought he is bringing a fundamental change that he promised while rallying for support from every corner of the world. Museveni has done a lot of positive things for the country, but there is that one thing he has failed to do, that is enabling the country to have a peaceful transition of power. Since independence, Uganda has never got that. Our independence was achieved in 1962 from the British. Uganda has been denied an opportunity to transition peacefully by change of leadership. So every election is a cycle of violence, brutality, silencing dissent, suppressing media freedom. It's a cycle repeated every after 5 years. So a president that has ruled the country for 40 years, this time round, last election, 2021, was also intense. This election has gone to the extreme that everybody is on tension. Even as we record this podcast, it's hard to access the family. They have to use virtual private networks, VPNs, because social media is restricted more than 10 days after elections. The internet, they switch on as and when they want. In an interview with Sky News just recently, Museveni was asked why he switches off the internet during elections, and he said, "We made the internet, so we have a right to switch it off whenever we want." This is despite the United Nations declaration that the internet is now considered a fundamental human right that you cannot take away from people. hundreds of opposition people are in prison for dissent. I mean, for having dissenting opinions. Media people cannot freely report about the election or whatever is happening. They cannot freely do that. So there is a lot of uncertainty, but probably that uncertainty should reignite more debates on the role of elections in championing democracy in Africa and whether democracy is a thing for Africa. Because when you organize elections, you present yourself as a democratic country. But what happens during the process? Does that represent the democracy that is defined in its entirety? So what's happening in Uganda is really, really worrying. It calls for concern. So many leaders are before courts of law, facing very serious crimes like terrorism. There is a leader today that has been charged with terrorism. It's uncertain. And the most probably embarrassing thing, everybody would like to identify by their country. What identifies me as a Ugandan before I say where I come from is a national flag. So apparently you cannot just carry your flag, your national flag anyhow. You can't put it in your car. You can't just say, oh, this is my flag. Oh. You're right away aligned with the opposition. You oppose the government. It's getting worse that some atrocities have been confirmed by the commander of defense forces, and that is the first son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, to an extent of posting on X that we have killed 22 terrorists, but the people he calls terrorists are just opposition supporters. Under a multi-party democracy or under a multi-party system that Uganda is, supporting an opposition candidate is now branded as a terrorist. Now tell me how, as a journalist, what really defines your freedom to report about such incidents? Like, where do you even get the energy, the emotional energy, the physical energy, and the capacity, like everything around storytelling, everything around journalism? What kind of support is even available for you to freely report? So free media is not a thing. One of the television stations, NTV, has not covered the president, the incumbent, throughout the election period because the president said, I don't want to be covered by NTV. They are biased. I don't want to be covered. So they didn't. They are also banned from covering a few institutions like Parliament. So free media doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. All we can do is to continue to advocate that media gets freed. They free the media, otherwise it is concerning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Culton, for talking us through what's happening in Uganda, and to help us see as well what does it mean and the constraint that they are attached right now to your profession and to many other journalists on the ground. Building on this, you are unfortunately not a stranger to attacks from the government, and how has the experience of being directly targeted affected your work? Has it changed the stories you choose to tell, or has it strengthened your determination to keep telling them?
The unfortunate incident that happened on 20th December 2020, of course, changed how I approach situations. once bitten, twice shy. Not that I allowed to be silenced, but it comes from a point of analyzing every situation carefully before any story. So in as much as we have the right to do commentary or to post about current affairs on our social media platforms, it challenged me to be more vigilant, because there were a couple of threats that followed, trying to silence me, people attacking my personality on social media, putting up stories, putting up things that I have no idea about. Somebody telling you something about you that you have no idea about. So those were social media attacks, trolls, and everything. The intention was to get me into a corner, to weaken my resolve, and to get me into defense mode. So such is expected in a country where people are killed and there is no accountability, where bloodshed has been normalized for political accountability. Such is expected. How we handle the aftermath is what matters. Because, even in this current election, journalists have been arrested. There was a by-election in sometime last year, and journalists were beaten, were targeted. So it's no longer about journalism anymore. It's about what you can do and then survive. So you have to concurrently think about the story and survival.
Thank you, Culton. Why we touched a bit about this when you were talking about democracy in Africa, and my question is, why is the African perspective important for the future of journalism?
The African perspective is vital because the world lacks context. The global north lacks context of the African identity. There are so many stereotypes. There are so many things going on around the world. So, in as much as Africa has its own struggles, the African story needs to be understood, and understood in the African context. So the more the African context is lacking from Western contexts, from Western audiences, that is not a positive thing, because we now coexist with each other. We now coexist, even if there are borders that separate us, there is a lot in common. There is a lot that we share. So it's important that what happens in Africa is reported, but it's not only about reporting. How are we represented? How is the African story told in the global north? How is it represented? How are stories framed? Do they represent the truth? Do they represent that truth with the cultural context? Or they intend to impose Western narratives on the African people? So the reason that these kind of conversations are really important is Africa needs to be understood. Its struggles, some of its problems originate from Western powers that bully the continent with so much impunity, So it simply needs to be understood.
Absolutely, and that's why we're also here to have conversation like this. And also, I'm curious to know, because you spent a year now in the UK with your master, and I know I didn't plan this question, but it's just like a curiosity that I have right now.
No
And
worries.
we're talking about narratives and how Africa is represented on Western media. What are the stories that maybe they are stuck with you, that you read on your UK newspaper or international newspaper since you were here in the UK as well? And have you noticed any positive change or maybe actually a negative trend in that sense?
So there was a story that it was run by the BBC that a Briton riding to um, there was a country the Briton was cycling to, and they got their phone snatched. That phone was snatched in Africa, in France. But I don't know if I can even Google that right now.
It's okay. I put you on the spot. I'm just interested because maybe
Yeah,
you had more
but
access to
exactly. The story was framed in a way that because this man was going into Africa, so his phone was snatched. That represented Africa with a lot of stereotype that Africans are probably thieves.
Hmm.
But the phone was not stolen from Africa. And in as much as the man was going to Africa, they didn't tell us whether the person that snatched the phone was an African. So my question was, how does Africa come in? Simply because it was his point of destination. Africa came in ignoring that the phone was snatched from France, and because this man is a Briton. But that also took me to my time at the university here at LSE, when a student asked my Italian friend whether they have roads in Italy.
Hmm.
Oh, do you have roads in Italy? I was like, roads? You mean roads? Yeah. Probably the person thought they use camels. I don't know.
Oh wow.
I had no context. So I asked, do you really want to tell me you don't know that there are roads in Italy? Like, oh, how about Africa? Tell us about Africa. Do you have roads? Okay, maybe Italy has. Do you have roads? That question is, you might think somebody's innocently inquiring about the status and the social welfare of Italy, Africa. But that kind of analysis or that kind of curiosity reflects what kind of information they have read, what kind of information they have been exposed to on what's happening in continents or regions outside their context. If somebody can question whether there is a road somewhere, somebody doing a master's degree, that question is really, really, really like, it's so intriguing. So that tells you that Africa has been misrepresented. I found somebody who asked me why I fear snakes. At the university, she was telling me she has a holiday in Australia. And I told her, oh, I've heard Australia has so many snakes. Which part are you going? And um, just just in case you don't know, take care. So he told me, oh, you fear snakes? I thought you guys live with snakes. I'm like, wait, we don't live with snakes. We encroach on their homes. So a conflict happens, but they also encroach on our homes. we encroach on each other's space, and whoever targets the other, beats the other, or, takes away their life. But the fact that the person was able to tell me that she thought in Africa we live with snakes, tell me, how does that person, what kind of narratives, how much more narratives exist in the Western world about Africa? How much of downgrading, how much of dehumanization exists that somebody says they thought we live with snakes, so I shouldn't fear snakes because we live with them. So, yeah, the reason the African story, of course, needs to be told is we have been misrepresented. We have been represented in a wrong way. So because the Western world is exposed to a lot of, they have global media, they have, of course, both global and local media. So they abuse their power against regions that are not as powerful as they are. So they use that media to tell people to misrepresent Africa. And so when people meet, even when they can coexist, they see each other as different. They see each other as one is superior, one is subordinate. And for as long as we have such narratives, the imbalance will still exist.
Absolutely, Culton. I mean, very, very important what you just highlighted here with us, and it takes me to the next question, which is, what kind of stories would you like to see then more represented? What is not being talked about enough in the media? We can take this from a gender perspective, but we can also take this from an African perspective. And so what are the stories that you hope to see more, or the stories that you, with Her Story Uganda as well, are bringing more to the front page?
The stories I would like to see more are stories that highlight Africa as simply a unique people. Yeah, I don't agree with addressing Africa. I mean, addressing each country in Africa as a collective, because we are simply, it's just a region. So stories that represent the region and don't put context to what exists beneath. And also, it seems like we are represented like we are victims of our own cultures. We are not victims of our own cultures. We're just unique. And that is what we are demanding for. To recognize that we are unique. We can coexist in our uniqueness, rather than representing us like we are victims of our cultures. Culture is our sense of belonging. If you really want to cause trouble, go for people's cultures. You know that everybody likes identity. I identify with my culture. So when you abuse that cultural identity, definitely it's not justice to the story. So it is acknowledging that people are different, people are unique, they are not victims. And that explains why different Western interventions in terms of aid, there are so many programs that have been sponsored by Western countries with that generosity, which is good, but those programs have failed. At the end of the budget year, they do an impact assessment and there is no impact. The reason is you get Western ideas and you want to impose them on the African people. You're going to fail. You're going to face resistance. You're going to waste money. These people know how best they can improve their lives. Involve them. Ask them how they want to change. Ask them how they want to do differently. So maybe they can tell you that this is what we want. Provide what they want. If you want to take people to a given direction, You don't simply lead them blindfolded, involve them. That solution will have better impact than imposing something on them and making people hate their own culture. That is how homophobia spread across Africa because of colonial laws of penal codes. And in the end, Africa is dealing with homophobia. Yet practices existed and nobody was being killed because of that. Because of penal codes and that came from Western context, people are against each other. That's the effect of misrepresenting the region. And for me, that is what I would like to see change.
And in terms of gender and women, why is it important for women across the world to pay attention to stories about women or stories from Africa, from Uganda?
Yeah, the world needs to understand the kind of resilience that African women possess. They are so resilient because cultural practices have made them marginalized. But within that kind of marginalization, they still exist. They still resist. They still persevere. So the kind of resilience needs to be understood.
I have one last question from my side, and then I will open the floor to the audience. What is your advice for female journalists that they are starting right now in their career?
So for female journalists, the world is so judgmental. They judge everything about women. And in the field of journalism, a lot of people are patronizing. You need to keep your head straight high. We need to tell more stories about gender. We need to break complex ideas to the people to understand them. We need the people to understand that it is not women against men, simply a demand for equality. We need to highlight more the issues that affect women differently. So the more we do it, we are contributing to the wide advocacy that's happening. I can't say it won't be hard. Several days will come and you want to be like, I'm giving up, I'm tired. But that moment of saying I'm tired should define your resilience, because the world needs you to tell more stories. And the world will remember your eras of resilience, not your breaking point.
Thank you, Culton, so much for this. I open the floor to the audience. If they have any question for you, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask.
All right.
Hi, that was so interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes, Camila.
Yes, we can.
I'm interested that you spoke about the fact you'd been a radio journalist in your past. What do you think? I'm a podcaster. What do you think is the advantage sometimes of telling a story purely in audio compared with TV or print journalism?
So with audio broadcast, it allows the listener time, whether you're traveling. So many people are traveling and listening to podcasts. So many people are doing other things than listening to podcasts, listening to radio. So it allows, there's flexibility, which is absent with other forms of media.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm also a big Burna Boy fan, so I love that you said that. I wanted to ask, in the current climate where the news agenda feels so focused on the same stories, I mean, I only read about Trump, which, I mean, he's making headlines about everything these days. How can we ensure we make space for stories about underrepresented communities in newsrooms that are very focused on pushing narratives like Trump that maybe they know people are interested in because they get clicks?
Thank you very much. So the media really sets the agenda. It shapes what the world focuses on. Forget about, yes, I know there is all this digital media and all that, but what the mainstream media focuses on is also important. So it begins with how much interest do the producers, the editors have in other issues that are happening, but also who influences these stories behind the people that make them. For example, who is the influencer behind all the Trump narratives? Is there somebody we don't know? Or it is because Trump is such a controversial president that everything he makes is a discussion for a week? Probably there is other people influencing these ideas. And how much influential are they to the companies that blow these narratives? So it begins with the people that shape what people see, what people read, what people hear. How much do they want the world to understand other issues beyond political narratives and other issues that are really dominate the media more than other? So it begins with editors checking themselves, producers, but also we need to look at the audience needs. A media company can broadcast a story, and thanks to digital media, they are able to track the kind of interest that their audience has in a particular story. I've come to understand that when an audience is not interested in the story, the media companies will not carry it forward, because they employ people, they pay them. So at the end of the day, they need revenues. But other media that are funded by public resources shouldn't do that. Media that are funded by private people or independent journalists maybe can do that, because really sustainability is also important. But companies that are funded by public resources should never deny people the right to know other things happening around the world and blow one narrative from one person, like that. That's my perspective.
And then maybe following on Cecilia's question, I have another one for you, because if we look at what's happening around the world, we're living in a situation where everything is extremely polarized, and if we look at diversity and inclusion and gender perspective, everything has been reframed so that gender does not even exist in programs in inclusion, and it's not something that we shouldn't be talking about it. With the work you're doing with Her Story and Uganda, and think about also the platform here of When Power and other feminist media organization, where do we find the space to have more gender perspective and gender narratives and stories with what's happening? Like, even if you think about it from a journalist, a freelancer perspective that wants to pitch a story to an editor, how can she do that in a way that she can still place that story despite everything else that is happening around us?
The good thing is that gender cuts across, whether peace and security. If you're discussing the war in Sudan, how is it affecting women? How is it affecting the marginalized, like children, women? If hunger is instrumentalized during unrest, people affected differently. Who benefits? If we're discussing infrastructure, there are unique things that affect people. Like, we need to put the gender lens to every aspect. That is how you spot stories. That is how you identify that this problem affects this section of people differently.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Culton. That's very insightful. One question. So, how do you approach, you have a powerful voice, sharing stories with the world. So how do you balance your unique voice as a storyteller in a way, and also preserving and staying true to the heart of a story you share?
I always say that I'm not neutral. I will be balanced. Everybody deserves the right to response. I will be fair, but I will not be neutral, because the reason my journalism refuses to be neutral is because the world is not neutral. We human beings, even regardless of our careers, the issues that are going on affect us as well. We have emotions. In as much as the professional code of conduct requires me to be balanced, I will only be balanced, but I will say you beat people, and we have to call a spade a spade. Other people will not see that as neutrality, because, like, honestly, by being neutral maybe means being silent. Because the fact that I'm reporting about this issue that you don't want me to talk about, in your face, I cease to be neutral. So by me telling the story, I lose the neutrality identity. And that means, for me, in terms of gender, journalism is advocacy, because I'm advocating for what I think should be right.
There's a question in the chat by Rachel. First of all, this has been very interesting and inspiring, so thank you. I wanted to ask if there was one thing you would want listeners to take away from your story, what would it be?
Thank you so much, Rachel. The one thing that they can take away from me is that we should never normalize injustices, or we need to resist the temptation of understanding injustice from our points of privilege. Privilege blinds people. In terms of gender, we need to reject the temptation of being blinded by privilege. That is why all these post-feminist narratives exist, because those that have been empowered think that women that are struggling are just weak, they're lazy, or they can't, they think we have arrived. Just speaking from a point of privilege, there is still much more work to do. So that is what I can give.
A huge thank you to our first guest, Culton Scovia, for sharing her insights and experiences with us today. Behind the headlines, it's all about amplifying the voices of women in journalism and exploring the stories that often go untold. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, follow us on social media, subscribe to the podcast, and join the When Power Circle. Be part of the community that's changing the face of journalism, one story at a time. I am your host, Ilaria Biancacci. Till the next time.